there's an inscription from a place called Mitzad Chashavyahu. It's near Yavna. It's on display at the Israel Museum, and it's an inscription by this man. And this does date to the 7th century BC, so it's much later. But it shows we have an Isbet Sarta in the 13th century. There's some common person who's writing out the alphabet and a bunch of random letters just to practice. And then we have hundreds of years later, in the 7th century BC, we have a man who's so poor he literally owns one garment. And he writes on this piece of pottery, this ostrakhan, he writes out a letter to a judge saying, and it's really cool because it's the earliest reference to Shabbat, to the Sabbath, outside of the Tanakh, outside of the Bible. And he talks about how he was harvesting and bringing in his harvest before Shabbat, and he put it in the granary. And the debtor came and took away his garment, and he says, "I don't have another garment. I need this returned to me." And he writes the same thing like 3 or 4 times. He's really you can tell he's upset when he's writing this. He's very passionate here. He's repeating himself. He wants his garment back, and he just keeps repeating himself. And it's really cool because here you have in 7th century BC, you have somebody who's literate, and then we have the Siloam inscription written in a tunnel. And who is reading that? It talks about how this tunnel was dug in the time of King Josiah, that these men were hitting with their axes. Well, who is doing that? You think the people in the royal court were swinging their axes? No, these were peasants. These were common folk who were working, and nobody could see that inscription except the tunnel workers, the people who were bent over. Maybe they were short, but I have to hunch over. There are people who were in there with little oil lamps who were cleaning out the tunnel. They were the only people who were ever expected to see this inscription. And so I walk away with this picture that the ancient Israelites could read. Mm-hmm. And to suggest that Moses could not have written the Torah, I don't think that fits the evidence, especially since Moses was raised in the royal house of Pharaoh.